Hello, everyone. My name is Tom DiFiore. I'm an attorney at Bay Area Legal Services in Tampa. For those of you that don't know about our organization, we provide free legal services to eligible residents in the five-county region. Um, you need to be income eligible and asset eligible, although in our new environment, we have a whole lot more people that are eligible for our services, unfortunately. Uh, And I'll give you our number now and at the end, but it's 1-800-625-2257. So if you have a legal problem, today we're going to be talking about housing and COVID-19. I am the team leader for the group at Bay Area called Team ABLE, which stands for Advocates for Basic Legal Equality. And we focus primarily on housing issues. So we're seeing a lot of issues obviously coming up with the situation we're dealing with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I would really welcome anybody to send me questions as we go along. I can see those questions. It always is, I think, a lot better to respond to questions than just hearing me drone on and on about things. But I'll try to keep it somewhat simple. I know that we lawyers tend to complicate things and get deep into the weeds on things, but I'll start that off and then we'll see where it takes us. So, the primary thing that we're seeing in this scenario that we're seeing a lot of that we haven't seen normally, that we don't see normally, is people that typically are able to pay their rent. Uh, they pay on time, they have good jobs, they take pride in keeping their rent up and keeping their history good in terms of tenancy. Um, what's happening to obviously to a lot of people is they've lost their jobs because of the COVID-19 virus. They have a decrease in income or a loss of job, and they're not able to pay their rent. So today is the 30th. Another month of rent is due. The first month was April before this started. So we got a lot of calls right before that. You may be behind on your rent now. Maybe you caught up in April, or maybe you're now at the 2 month period with your rent behind. And the big question is, I don't have enough money for rent. What can happen to me? Can my landlord evict me? So the first thing I need to say on that is there's a lot of uh, news reports and a lot of discussion and information in the media about different protections that are resulting as a result of COVID-19. And we're going to talk about those. There are two main ones. One is the governor's moratorium in the state of Florida, and the second one is a federal, which goes across the entire country under the CARES Act. What I want to say and put up front first on these is that uh, neither one of these or any of the protections excuses payment of rent. So nowhere does it say that the amount of rent does not is not legally owed. I'm not saying I think that maybe that would be a great idea, but there's nothing out there that says that. So all these things I'm going to be talking about later on are really basically putting off or kicking the can down the road on the point at which you could actually be removed from your house uh, or apartment. So that you're renting. So the first order of business is I know a lot of people out there are thinking, uh, that's nice, that's fine, but the whole reason I'm in the situation is because I don't have the money to pay my rent. And we understand that. But I think the key point is to speak with your landlord, and I'm probably most of you have already done that. Some suggestions on how to approach your landlord certainly is whatever money you might have after you're paying your expenses and keeping your electric and water on and feeding your families. This is what I have right now that I can offer to you. If you don't have enough or I don't have anything besides that, then the other thing that's going on, as we all know, is a lot of people are applying for unemployment benefits. And that could be a whole other topic. A lot of people are not getting that money. But it can be something you can go to your landlord about and say, here's what I've done. I've applied for unemployment. I'm waiting on it. For most people, that's going to be at least an extra $600 a week on top. That's the federal amount on top of the state amount of unemployment, which maxes out at $275 a week. So there's a potential there for $875 a week that may be coming in, maybe not now, but in the future. You can mention that to your landlord. Obviously, the stimulus money checks that people are available out there. If you don't know about that, you probably have heard about that. For individuals, $1,200 stimulus check can be available for married couples under certain income up to $2,400. So these are avenues above and beyond these moratoriums and restrictions on evictions that you need to put first and foremost. How am I going to talk to my landlord? How am I going to avoid him from filing an eviction? So the eviction process, the first thing a landlord needs to give you if it's non-payment of rent is a 3-day notice. And that notice says you have 3 days to pay this amount. If you don't, it's your last chance to pay the rent, and then I can file an eviction in court. You do not want the eviction filed in court if at all possible, because once that eviction's filed, it's going to be on the record. Even if you later settle the case or work it out, even if you or go to court and have the judge dismiss it, it's still going to show up as a filed eviction. So this is something really most people want to avoid, to make sure that their rental history, does not end or have a bad mark on it. And I know that's a big concern with a lot of people we've been talking to, because typically we're talking to people that have always been on time on their rent, never missed a payment. They're very careful about that. So getting to your landlord early is important. If you want to talk to us, I mean, certainly at any point you can call us at any point in the process. We are getting involved when evictions are filed. We could also potentially get involved to try and work with the landlord, but usually we need something to deal with, some sort of offer or something to bring to the table, and that's what you need to be thinking about. So we've talked about essentially what happens without any protections, legal protections that are the result of COVID-19. So now we'll talk a little bit about those protections that are out there. I will mention that this is a lot of information I'm throwing at everyone, but if you go to our Facebook page under the photos link, you'll see a number of flyers there that we produced. And these flyers are going to sort of summarize a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. So if you don't pick up something, or you say, wow, that's a lot of information, I couldn't really understand that, please go there and look at that information. And if in doubt, you can call that number. And we are obviously getting a lot of phone calls, but we're at a minimum, what we try and do is do a phone consult on the phone to talk about your situation and then evaluate it further. So we at Bay Area Legal Services, we've been here since 1967 in the Tampa Bay area, and we're open for business. And most of us are working remotely, although today I'm in the office because we couldn't quite figure out the technology for doing this from my home computer. But it actually is sort of nice to be in my office again. I haven't been here for about 5 weeks. But so let's go into those protections. So remember, we talked about federal and state. So we'll go over the state one first. And what a lot of people know about and have heard about is Governor DeSantis's order to stop evictions. So this order was effective April 2nd, signed by the governor. And what it basically says, and I'll try and keep this simple, is our interpretation anyway, as legal services lawyers, and this is the way we're looking at it, is that really nothing should really proceed in eviction cases until the order is out. And that's on right now, May 17th of this month. I guess tomorrow is May 1st. So 17 days from now, this order expires, but it can be extended by the governor. And it basically, we think it should stop the filing of evictions. It should stop any paperwork going forward. That's not happening in a lot of cases in Hillsborough County, also in Pinellas. I think since the governor's stay-at-home order, we estimate there's been at least 200 evictions filed, which is quite a few in Hillsborough County alone. And those evictions, the main thing is if you get an eviction paper, definitely call our office. We can either consider representing you or give you advice about how to file your own response, because you have 5 days to respond when you get that paper. Very important that you respond. And we can assist in giving you ideas about what to put in there, about I got behind because of COVID-19. The governor's order is in place. Therefore, this eviction should not go forward. Other things like that. So pay very close attention if you actually get legal papers. Um, so the papers are being filed. Um, the interpretation of different counties uh, are that we're going to let the evictions sort of run their course, except for the last stage, which is called the writ of possession. So this, uh, to put it in layman's terms, if an eviction being filed is, um, 12:01 a.m. and start of the day, the writ of possession is probably like 11:30 p.m. at night, 23 hours and 23 and a half hours later. There's only a half hour left before the sheriff comes, puts a paper called a final notice of eviction on the door, and that gives you in Hillsborough County 48 hours to vacate. So all these orders at a minimum are basically giving you the protection from that writ of possession being put on the door until, um, we're saying May 29th, because there's a Florida Supreme Court order that extends that. So the governor's order is May 17th, the Supreme Court order May 29th. So basically, there's a little bit of breathing room right now, probably about another month before these evictions can go forward. Uh, and some of them have gotten pretty close to that point already. So, the key point is to use this time that you have to maybe try and work something out with your landlord. Now, the governor may very well extend that order. Will he or will he not? We don't know. I would hope that he would not. Uh, we're talking about opening restaurants. We're talking about opening other things at 25%. I think that came out yesterday. So there are some moves to open up the state of Florida. I think a move to open up people being put on the street would probably get uh, certainly a look by the governor as maybe that's something we should hold off on. So keep your eyes peeled to the news, because that's something that's very important if you're behind on your rent, to know if that date is going to get extended. And it very well could be, or it could not. So be aware of that, and on the lookout, and keep your eyes peeled or ears peeled to the news on that particular issue. So that's one protection that's out there. We'd like to think that most landlords are not filing evictions. Most landlords' attorneys are holding off, but some are not. Some are still going forward with them. And if you're one of the unfortunate ones that that's happening to, please call us if you've been served with a summons, and at a minimum, we can talk you through it, the process, help you with formulate a response, and take it from there. Um, so really, a lot of the people we've been talking to, I know me personally, when you talk to people, it's very gut wrenching, really, to hear people's stories. And it's hard enough as it is if you have income and you have a place to live, and you've got some stability there. But to put this on top of that, the stress that, everyone is under, and to add, fear of losing your housing, just is a lot to bear. So, so, so keep in mind the governor's protection that's out there. We have not seen any of those 200 cases. None of them has gotten to the point where a writ of possession has been turned over to the sheriff. That's the last stage. So normally, that there have been a lot of those that would have happened with. So that protection is out there. We're trying to help extend that protection. We're working on that. Uh, and we're trying to get it so that these cases are stopped right at the beginning, and don't proceed any further. So there'll be more breathing room because what's happening is these are all piling up. So whenever the governor's order is lifted, there's likely to be a wave of uh, of these final notices of eviction going on people's doors, and we don't want it to be at that stage. We want it to be at the earlier stage so that there's a better possibility of working something out, maybe mediating a settlement and coming up with some sort of reasonable agreement. So that's where that stands with the governor's order. Now, so I'm looking for questions, but I don't see any. So you have to listen to me. So talk some more. So, uh, so next up, we talked about the state protection. There's the governor's order. There's also a Supreme Court order in the state of Florida that basically is pushing all this off until at the latest May 29th. Uh, so what is this? I keep talking about federal, federal, federal. So you may have heard the president get on early on and say there are going to be no evictions. So a lot of people heard that and thought, oh, great, nobody's going to be evicted. It's a little more nuanced than that, as it always is. The devil's in the details, but there is a fairly broad protection under the CARES Act. So you may have heard that term being thrown around. That's the law that was passed. It includes a lot of extra money for unemployment. It includes the money about the economic stimulus check from the IRS, but it also has a section on evictions. And the key point there are three things that need to happen for this protection to be kicked in. Number one, the eviction, it has to be on or after the date that was signed. So if there was an eviction filed before March 27th, then there's a good argument on the other side that this protection doesn't apply. So it's really post after all this stuff started. So that's one thing you need to be remember. If you had an eviction going on before this, or you're behind on your rent before this, it may not apply. So on or after March 27th, 2020. And it needs to be the mortgage. There has to be a mortgage on the property that you're living in, and the mortgage needs to be federally backed or insured. So what does that mean? Federally backed or insured? Obviously, if there's no mortgage on the property or the mortgage is paid off, arguably they could say, well, it doesn't apply to us. But if you have a mortgage on the property uh, that has a federal backing, the federal government is saying, if we're giving you a benefit, then what you need to do is give the tenants a break that are in that property. And what exactly is that break? Uh, the break you're getting is a lot more significant than the governor's order. Basically, it says that no eviction should be filed or even proceed until 120 days after the act was signed. And that would put us at July 25th of 2020. And after July 25th, 2020, there's also a requirement that the landlord give an additional 30-day notice to quit or end the tenancy. So that gets us to August 24th, 2020, which is a lot further than May 17th or May 29th. So this all sounds great, right? So that applies to me. If that applies to me, I've got a lot more time. Again, it doesn't excuse the rent that's accruing during that period, but it gives you more time to catch yourself up and work out a plan, more time to get unemployment benefits coming in, more time to go back to work as the state opens up, more time to get your stimulus check, more time for everything. So the more time you have, the better chance you have of avoiding that eviction filing and keeping your record clean and getting back to normal. So, as I said, it sounds great. So how do I know if this applies in my situation? That's the hard part, because as a tenant, I do not know whether, even a lot of times I don't know if there's a mortgage on the property or whether it's insured or backed. The easy cases where it's pretty clear to know that you have that protection is if there's a clear federal subsidy. So subsidy, basically, if the rent's $1,000, let's say $1,200 a month. If my rent is $600 a month and the federal government's paying 600 and I pay 600, then we know there's a federal subsidy. This is Section 8 based housing, public housing, HUD subsidized senior housing. So it's pretty clear in the situation, if you know that you're not paying the entire rent that the federal government is paying, you definitely have this protection. And if a landlord tries to file an eviction in that situation, you definitely need to call us. I don't think we're seeing too many of those where there's a clear federal subsidy. The other type of property, which you may or may not know that you're in, is called a low income housing tax credit property, LIHTC. And in this type of property, and in the other examples I gave you, your income goes up and down with your rent goes up and down with your income in Section 8 and those other types of places. And you would know this because you have to report any change in income. So the key point there is if you've lost your job and you had a job and you were in one of these, you know you need to report your income immediately so that if you're and usually your rent is about a third of your income. So if your income is about 1,000, your rental payment is going to be 300, and the federal subsidy will pay the rest. But if you lose your job and go down to zero, your rent goes down to zero. So you won't be in trouble there. So that's a really nice thing to have if you have it. Low income housing tax credit properties don't work like that. They basically have a below market rent. So if the rent would usually be 1,200, you might be paying something like 700, 800, or 900. And if you lose your job, your rent does not go down; it stays the same. But they would have to wait under the CARES Act until, as we said, that long period of time to file the eviction as late as August 24th. Other properties that are covered, this is the more difficult ones to find. A low income tax credit, pretty easy to tell that from looking at the mortgage, or you would know because, again, you have to report your income every year and get recertified. So you would probably know that that situation it applied. The ones that are hard are if you have a Fannie or Freddie backed mortgage. So the example I would give is I have a mortgage on my house. I know pretty sure that Fannie Mae is a federal agency that backs or insures it. If I was renting that house as a private owner, this would apply to me. So somewhere close to at least 50 or 60% of the properties out there are actually backed by Fannie or Freddie. But you as a tenant would have no way of knowing that. And there's a website where an owner can look it up and see if they're Fannie or Freddie insured. A lot of people don't even know whether they are or they're not, people that own homes. So you're sort of in a bind as a tenant to figure that out. And this is one of the main areas that we're trying to find a better solution to, because that's a huge protection you have under the CARES Act to have that restriction on the evictions extend way out to as late as August 24th. Some ideas we have is you can call the servicer of the loan if you knew who that was, and they may tell you. You can bring it up in your response if they file an eviction. We're alleging that the burden is on the owner of the property to prove it. So it's a tricky area. It's a big protection, but it needs to be asserted. So, if you get to the point where you happen to know, you can even ask your landlord, "Hey, do you have a Fannie or Freddie mortgage?" They may not answer that question, but if they get to the point where they're actually filing an eviction, I would say give us a call and we can look further into it. One thing that we're advocating for is that any eviction that's filed, hopefully that the landlord be required to sign a paper swearing under oath that it's not federally backed or insured, and what efforts they made to show that it's not before they can proceed with the eviction. That would be the ideal situation, or a much more better situation, maybe not totally ideal to what we have now, which is the plaintiff or landlord can basically just file an eviction without having to say yes or no on that. So we're working on trying to get that to happen as well. Uh, so that's the second big protection that we have, and that's relating to COVID. Those are the two big main areas that have changed in the way the law works. Now, one big thing I need to mention is that these two things apply only in cases for non-payment of rent. meaning the reason you're being evicted is non-payment of rent. So there are other types of cases other than non-payment of rent that can happen, and if they're legitimate other than non-payment of rent cases, then arguably the CARES Act doesn't apply, nor does the governor's protection, those protections we've been talking about. So what is other than non-payment of rent? Okay. Typical example would be you're a month-to-month tenant. You pay rent by the month, and your landlord comes and says, okay, I don't want to rent to you anymore, and they give you a 15-day notice terminating your tenancy, or your lease runs out and your landlord chooses not to renew it. This has nothing to do with whether or not you pay the rent, and it's a legitimate reason for a landlord to end the tenancy. And if you don't move out at the time that they tell you to, then they can file an eviction and call you what's called a holdover tenant. Another reason could be they can give you a notice called a 7-day notice. This is typically for two types of things. One, things that you can fix or cure, like get rid of the dog, get rid of the trampoline, get rid of the car in the front yard that's not operable, stop having loud parties, stop having guests over. These things, again, have nothing to do with rent. And then there's notices without opportunity to cure. And this is if you're destroying property or creating a dangerous situation. So these are all, the protections would not apply that we talked about, the governor and the federal CARES Act protection. But I will say that even if the landlord gives you a notice for non-payment of rent, there's a decent argument that you could make, given this environment, that potentially it's really about non-payment of rent, and they're just saying it's not to avoid that protection. So this is the way we lawyers think, right? Well, maybe on first appearance, it doesn't look like it's about non-payment of rent. But in fact, they're basically trying to evade the law. So that's a sort of a creative type of argument that could be made, and we can help if you called us and got served with a paper, either assist you in crafting such a response or maybe possibly helping you in court with that. So that's a very important point to bring out, that you may say, hey, what, I thought they weren't allowed to do this. Well, if you look, and I think of the cases that we're running total on and data and keeping on the filings, at least in Hillsborough County, and of those 160 to 200 or so, probably I would say 10% are other than non-payment of rent. Large majority that we're seeing and that are being filed are going to be non-payment of rent, but there is a certain percentage that are not. And if they're legitimate and it really has nothing to do with the rent, it has to do with some other thing that the landlord can prove, then you're basically in a pre-COVID era, and you have the right to defend that and deny it and have the landlord prove it in court. But you won't get that extra protection that we were speaking of. Let me see if I have anything else to talk about. There's one thing is, does my landlord allowed to come into my property during this COVID-19 situation? The landlord tenant law addresses this. I don't think there's been any change to that. If it's an emergency situation, they certainly are allowed to. If they see smoke pouring out of the room and nobody's there, or water's coming from the second floor to the first floor, they can certainly go in and address that situation. If they want to do a normal inspection, they need to give a certain notice, at least 12 hours notice of that entry. If you're concerned about that, them coming in, you can address that and let them know, I'm a little concerned about you coming into my apartment, given the present situation, and I guess work out some sort of a accommodation. Is this really necessary now? What's the purpose? So that's one thing that if you have a factual situation like that, again, you can call us and we can talk more through it. So we're talking about what other unemployment as a potential source of income or potential source of resolving a rent arrearage, a stimulus check, getting back to work potentially, or finding some other income. Some other possibilities that are out there, the United Way, and I'll give you this number, has I think it's a resource line that can help you to get you to resources that may be able to assist with rental assistance. That number is 1-866-211-9966. 1-866-211-9966. I sound like a commercial. And I don't believe the United Way is actually distributing money, but they can help you find places that might have it. 211 is also a good resource to get information on that. Hillsborough County Social Services, the county in Hillsborough, has a rental assistance program. They've had that long standing. And I'm not sure about their availability, but your local DCF office is the place to go for that. And Metropolitan Ministries, if you go to their website, we're under the understanding that they may have some rental assistance as well. And another thing to note, that CARES Act that we talked about earlier has a lot of provisions in it for rental assistance, potentially, coming down from the federal government down to the states. So there may be ongoing announcements about agencies that maybe haven't received that money yet for rental assistance or haven't decided what to do with the money yet. So definitely, keep on top of the news, and there may be, and even our website, announcements about other sources of potential rental assistance. The caveat, nice legal word there, caveat meaning the exception to that is, or the warning is, that a landlord needs to agree to take the money. They're not required to legally. They may have to wait longer for the money than they want to. They have to sign forms and typically complete paperwork to help them from the agency. The agencies that have the money need to show that the money actually went for the rent. So there's some bureaucracy and paperwork involved in that. So there's no absolute certainty that if you went to your landlord with some rental assistance paper to sign, that they're going to either, one, sign it, or two, that the money necessarily will always come through. So keep that in mind as well when you're dealing with rental assistance. If you're a veteran, St. Vincent de Paul Society runs a program called Supportive Services to Veterans and Their Families. That's been around and has been a very, very successful program in keeping vets from being homeless. And certainly, if you're in a situation where you're a vet and you're behind on your rent, you definitely want to call St. Vincent de Paul. I don't have their number here right now, but if you did a web search on that, you could find that. That would be another resource that's out there. So my throat is getting tired. I really wish I could have a live person ask me a question, but I guess we're getting used to being in our little non-person, no human contact vacuum. So I'm feeling a little bit that way. Hope everybody's still awake. And I hope this was helpful. I don't know that I have much else to put forth at this time. I think the main thing is, again, in summary, talk to your landlord before an eviction's filed. Whatever you can do to help work out something and prevent them from doing that, that really would be the best thing in the long run. I know you're saying, well, how can I do that without money? Again, evidence that you've applied for unemployment, evidence that you've applied for a stimulus, something from your job saying you're coming back to work. Those are all helpful things. You have a little bit of leverage on the landlord, we think, in the sense that if they remove you from the property, who's going to move in? There's a lot of people in the same boat that are not getting the same income they had. So if I was a landlord, to move somebody out and move somebody in, I'm going to be losing 2-3 months rent at a minimum. And if you're a good tenant and you've been a good tenant over a period of time and you haven't damaged the property, that's why I would take that into account as a landlord and say, I want to work with this person and keep them here. Hopefully their patience may get thinner as it gets to 2-3, even 4 months behind on rent. So we're waiting to see what happens with that. But I hope everybody is well, and I hope you know this situation, which is very difficult for everybody, eases up a little bit. Either you get some of that unemployment, uh, or you're able to get back to work and get some income coming in. So I think we'll end now. Oh, there were comments. Oh, I didn't scroll down. Oops, there's lots of questions. See, I'm a technological nobody here. Let me go. I stopped at way to go, Tom. Wow. People still waiting for unemployment benefits. How can they pay? Yeah, I think I've addressed that. I'm not saying it's easy to pay, but at least to let the landlord know that you're waiting for it. Question, if they're living in federally subsidized, in public housing, you have a reduction in income. Excuse me. Yes, your rent can be adjusted to reflect it. You should immediately report that to your caseworker or anyone else. I should have some water available. I think we covered that question. Can your landlord lock you out? Very good question by somebody. Nicole. I know Nicole. I won't say how I know her, but yeah. So anyway, good question. Landlord-tenant law prohibits you from being locked out of your apartment from self-help eviction. So self-help eviction, there's a lot of different things that self-help eviction include. That includes shutting off the electricity, changing the locks on the doors. If you're provided air conditioning, shutting that off, um, those sort of things. You need to go to court if you want to evict somebody. So all those things we see on a regular basis. So this is not some imaginary thing. And this may be something a desperate landlord that knows they have to wait to evict may try. So if that happens, immediately call our office. If you're locked out, always keep on your person in your, wallet or in your purse or whatever you carry around, some sort of proof that you live on the property, electric bill, the lease. Very good idea to do that. Usually we tell people if they think this might be a threat or a threat is made. So then you can call the police and say, hey, I live here. Here's the proof I live here. Let me in. And a lot of times, hopefully the police will say you need to let them in. Sometimes the police will even authorize you to say, go ahead and break the window and get in there. So that's definitely a great issue to bring up that I did not. Let me go further. Okay, a student renting an apartment on campus, can't pay my rent, and I'm thinking about going back home instead of finishing my lease for the summer. Do I have any rights? Good question. What's going to bear on this is what your lease says. So there's really nothing in any new protections under COVID that says, as a result of COVID-19, I get to, if I'm not in the apartment, I don't owe the money, I'm not liable. My son is on a student lease, I'm the guarantor. So I know this intimately that, they're going to come after the guarantor, typically not the student. So it's usually the parent that's the guarantor. So the only thing I could say in that situation is talk to the landlord, see if you can work out maybe a reduced amount or some other situation. I think most of these, student housing type places are not super lenient on that. And I don't really know that I could say that there's a legal argument to be made that, hey, you don't owe any money because of this virus. I mean, it's unfortunate, but if that happens, we can maybe take a longer look at your lease and take a peek at that. Well, lots of questions. Okay. If you have no lease, that's not really as much of a problem, actually. A month-to-month lease can be verbal. They still need to go to court to evict you, and the protections are still available under both these acts, even if you don't have a written lease. Gloria Arthur. Is there a possibility of a class action if numerous people in the Tampa Bay area are evicted? Potentially, though, our organization, we get funding from a federal agency called the Legal Services Corporation. So we are prohibited from filing class actions. There may be some consumer lawyers in the area that potentially could be interested in that. A good website might be the National Association of Consumer Advocates, NACA. And that might be something there. I'd have to think more about that. If there's a numerous group of people that have been adversely affected by a law, that's a possibility. Question, does the moratorium prohibit the landlord from issuing a 3-day notice for failure to pay rent, even if he doesn't file the eviction until after the expiration of the moratorium? Our position is no, they shouldn't even file a 3-day notice. And we brought that up in some pleadings. So, that's a question of interpretation, but we're reading the governor's order to say that it tolls and suspends any action for an eviction. That would mean the entire process of the Florida law called Chapter 83. So a landlord, they can still give you the notice. So that's a good question, and I think arguably it could be considered in violation of that and be raised as a defense, and maybe even prior to the eviction being filed, bringing it up to the landlord. Next question. If the Hillsborough County Sheriff Office is serving an eviction, how can the landlords continue to file and serve tenants? And I think we covered that eviction process earlier. In Hillsborough County, anyway, the clerk of the court is still accepting summonses. They're still accepting the filings. They're still issuing the summonses and starting the process, and running that through, in some cases, towards the end, if a tenant doesn't file a response. So the sheriff's office only gets involved at the last stage of the eviction proceeding. So they can, that's how they're able to continue filing them and serving tenants at this point. We're working to try and potentially stop that from happening. We'll see what happens with that. Another question, in Pinellas County, there is rental assistance for families within 200% of poverty guidelines through Pinellas County government, as well as the Pinellas Opportunity Council. Okay, this is actually some informational from another advocate here. So in Pinellas County, rental assistance, if you're within 200% of poverty, through the Pinellas County government and the Pinellas Opportunity Council. So you may want to look those agencies up if you're in Pinellas and looking for some rental assistance. And also it's noted that you can call 211 to also access rental assistance options, as you can here. All right. We have another number to give out on, we have a veterans legal helpline through Bay Area Legal Services. If you're a veteran, please call this number with any legal problem. And this also applies to the number I gave you. It's not just for housing issues. It could be family law issues, it could be unemployment issues, it can be any issue to call and at a minimum get a consultation with a lawyer here if you're eligible. And most people, as I said, are eligible, more so than before because of the loss of income. The Veterans Legal Helpline number, 1-866-486-6161, 1-866-486-6161. And that's the Bay Area Legal Services Veterans Legal Helpline. That's a statewide hotline, not just in our area. It's been a very successful project. So please, if you're a veteran, call that and we'll have resources and assistance for you. Someone else asked, how do I apply for this stimulus? I'd have to pull out my notes on that. I'm not a super expert, but I can go with what I think I know off the top of my head. Most people, the answer is you don't have to do anything. If you filed a tax return in 2018 or 2019 and you got a refund and there's a direct deposit information to your bank account, it will happen automatically. I know many people have gotten their checks, but some have not. So that's the easy answer. If you've already filed the tax return in 2018 or 19, and if you do not put direct deposit information there, then you likely will get mailed a check. I would also go to the IRS website and check around, because I believe there's a way that you can put in direct deposit information if you haven't done it, to have that money come quicker. if you have not filed a tax return in many years, or the last 2 years, there is definitely definitely on the IRS website, there's something they've set up to allow you to do that. I don't have that information with me right now, but check there because I think they've set up a portal where you can apply for that and get that money even if you haven't filed a tax return. Okay, how can someone determine if their landlord's property is federally backed, and if it is, when CARES expires for eviction purposes? Well, the second part, CARES expires for eviction purposes. I think we mentioned that, but it bears repeating. That would be July 25th, 2020. No sign that that would be extended. Possible it could be. And then after that date, then there's another the landlord's required to give another 30-day notice to quit until August 24th, 2020, before they're supposed to file an eviction. And how can you determine if it's federally backed? I've gone over that. That's a difficult question, especially with the majority of cases, which may be these Fannie or Freddie backed mortgages. But you know, that's something again that we're working on. And we do have a little note here. I'll repeat it, that St. Vincent de Paul Cares, CARES, is helping veterans through the SSVF program. I mentioned that also in the 5-county area. That's supportive services for veterans and their families. A great program. We've been dealing with them for many years and have great success. They can catch up multiple months in rent if you're eligible and keep you from being evicted. What do I do if my landlord admitted to making a mistake on my lease after it signed it and now threatening an eviction? I guess it depends on what the mistake is. I would suggest maybe you call our office. I'm not really sure what that would be, what kind of mistake it is. Some mistakes are more important than others. But we'd probably have to take a closer look at that. Another question about a trailer park. So this is a good issue as well. If you own a mobile home and there's more than 10 lots in the mobile home park, you have a little bit more protection under what's called Chapter 723. But again, I would say these moratoriums would apply to that. It's like the third question about no leases. And as I said, I think you don't really need, not a requirement to have a written lease to have these protections. All right, another number to give out: Assistance for Seniors, Senior Legal Helpline, another Bay Area project. We have 2 statewide legal hotlines. One is for veterans, the other is for seniors. And I think that's defined as over 60 years old and within our income guidelines. A Senior Legal Helpline statewide. Here's another number: 1-888-895-7873, 1-888-895-7873. And you can call that number and again get screened and get help if you're a senior. And I think if you go to bals.org, our website, you'll find there information on all the various programs, including our coronavirus information. So be sure to go to bals.org, and you can also get information further about this. Can we see this from the beginning? I came on late. I believe it's being recorded, and if you check with our website or our Facebook page, I think it will be replayed at another time. As you can tell, I'm not a technological wizard. It took me 38 minutes into it to see that there were a bunch of questions when I kept saying, where are the questions? Because I didn't scroll down on the little